Hey there, and welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a topic that touches pretty much everyone. Whether you're raising kids right now or maybe just reflecting on how you grew up yourself, this one is for you. You know, it all starts with this deeply ingrained, completely natural human instinct, the absolute fierce desire to protect our children. But as we navigate today's super complex world, a really fascinating question comes up in developmental psychology and neuroscience. How do we balance that protective instinct with the need to build capable, fully independent adults? Let's jump right in and see what the science actually has to say about it. So here's the big central question we really need to ask ourselves. Are we actually protecting our kids from success? Think about it. In our well-meaning efforts to shield them from failure or discomfort or just everyday disappointment, some modern parenting approaches might accidentally be stunting their independence and their executive function. We all want to pave a completely smooth road for them, right? But the science strongly suggests that it's those bumps in the road that literally teach them how to drive.
And we're seeing the real-world impact of this dynamic right now. Take Julie Lythcott-Haims, for example. She's the former dean of freshmen at Stanford University. She noticed this trend where, year after year, students were showing up on campus with these incredibly impressive resumes, but absolutely no sense of actual independence. Because their parents had constantly protected them from failure, made all their choices, and solved every little problem, these young adults were arriving in a state of learned helplessness. Basically, when life threw them a curveball, they just didn't know how to handle it.
To really unpack how this happens and what we can do about it, here is our roadmap for today. 1. The modern parenting dilemma. 2. The 4 parenting styles. 3. The science of overparenting. 4. Decision-making and the brain. 5. The limits of parenting. And finally, 6. Building resilient, independent adults.
Section 1. The modern parenting dilemma.
At its core, this dilemma usually boils down to a classic developmental mismatch. Are you a manager or a micromanager? Now, when kids are really young, parents absolutely have to be managers. But as they grow up, kids naturally and biologically strive for independence. They genuinely want to own their accomplishments. So conflict bubbles up when older children desperately need the space to try. And yes, to fail. But parents just keep orchestrating and monitoring their every single move. This helicopter parenting almost always comes from a place of love and anxiety, but it actually deprives the child of developing crucial problem-solving and coping skills. The child just feels micromanaged, which, you guessed it, can lead to resentment or that learned helplessness we were just talking about.
Moving on to Section 2, the 4 parenting styles. Back in 1983, researchers Maccabi and Martin took decades of behavioral research and beautifully simplified it into 4 core styles, mapping them out along 2 main axes. On one side, you have warmth and responsiveness. On the other, demandingness and expectations. This creates 4 distinct quadrants. If you have high demand but also high warmth, that's called the authoritative style. High demand but low warmth, that's authoritarian. Low demand combined with high warmth is permissive, and if it's low on both, that's neglectful. Now, to be clear, scientists don't use this framework to judge parents. It's just an objective tool to measure exactly how different environments shape a child's psychological growth.
Section 3. The science of overparenting.
A really crucial piece of the puzzle here is understanding the stark difference between involvement and control. True authoritative parenting requires something psychologists call autonomy support. This basically means you are highly engaged, but you actually respect your child's own goals and their reasoning. This is completely different from psychological control, which leans heavily on guilt, anxiety, or manipulation to force compliance. Setting healthy behavioral boundaries is fantastic, but exerting psychological control, that actively undermines a child's self-determination.
When we compare those other highly involved styles, we start to see some seriously contrasting risks. Take the authoritarian style, for instance. It's super strict but lacks emotional warmth, and research shows this often yields children with lower self-esteem and reduced social competence. But then, on the flip side, the permissive style is incredibly warm, but really avoids setting boundaries or consequences. That approach often results in children with lower self-regulation and much higher impulsivity. So both of those extremes really miss that developmental sweet spot of high warmth paired with crystal clear expectations.
Section 4. Decision-making and the brain.
Let's talk about the biology of the developing mind, because emotional self-control is absolutely key to positive learning outcomes. Neuroscience actually tells us that the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of the brain that handles executive functions like planning, problem-solving, and emotional regulation, continues developing well into early adulthood. It definitely doesn't just magically switch on the day someone turns 18. It needs years and years of practice. If a child is never allowed to feel frustrated, make a bad choice, and navigate the fallout, their prefrontal cortex literally isn't getting the reps it needs to mature properly.
And longitudinal data totally backs this up. A major study by Weller and colleagues tracked kids from ages 10 to 14 to assess the parenting styles they grew up with. Then, they checked back in and measured those same kids' actual decision-making competence at age 19. The findings were pretty striking. Experiencing high psychological control in early adolescence directly predicted lower decision-making skills almost a whole decade later. So denying a child autonomy doesn't just make them a bit rebellious in the short term. It actively impairs their ability to make competent, rational choices once they become young adults.
Section 5. The limits of parenting.
Now, this is a vital pressure release for anyone listening because it is incredibly important to remember that parenting style is just one single slice of the outcome pie. In a massive 2016 meta-analysis looking at over 1,000 studies, researcher Martin Pinquart confirmed that while authoritative parenting is consistently linked to better outcomes, the overall effect size is actually fairly modest. What does that mean? Well, it means parenting style definitely explains some of the variance in how a child turns out, but it doesn't explain the whole shebang. Genetics, peer relationships, the safety of their neighborhood, and economic factors all play massive, massive roles. The science is crystal clear here. We absolutely shouldn't blame parents for everything, and parents definitely shouldn't put the absolute weight of their child's entire future solely on their own shoulders.
Section 6. Building resilient, independent adults.
Let's translate all of this awesome data into some really practical, empowering takeaways. Based on decades of research into that authoritative sweet spot, here are 4 actionable steps. Number 1, explain your rules rather than just enforcing them with a standard because I said so. Number 2, hold high expectations, but absolutely do not withdraw your warmth or your love when they inevitably fail. Number 3, make safe space for disagreement without dropping your structural boundaries. It's actually okay for them to push back. That's literally how they learn to negotiate. And finally, number 4, constantly calibrate their autonomy to their developmental stage. As they get older, you really have to let out the leash. Being emotionally warm doesn't mean avoiding difficult moments or constantly rescuing them from the consequences of their actions. It means being their secure base while they figure the world out for themselves.
We've covered a ton of fascinating ground in this Explain It today, from the neuroscience of the prefrontal cortex all the way to the long-term impacts of autonomy support. So I want to leave you with a provocative thought to chew on. Think back for a second. How did your own childhood shape the way you balance warmth and boundaries today? Do you naturally lean toward being a manager or more of a micromanager? It's definitely something to think about. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep exploring the science behind how we grow.